Okay, wait, I've gone a little bit too far ahead. Back, here we go. All right, let's recap and focus on some of the things Tom said and try to get a big picture for this idea of economics, which we know is the biblical word oikonomos, but it's a very important area. Let's have a look at it. We need to, of course, remind ourselves why we're covering topics like what is a biblical view. It's because Christians have not been thinking about all of life. Christians have been thinking about how to get to heaven, not how to build a godly, God-pleasing society. So here in Jeremiah 9:23, we read two important aspects of being a Christian: to know God and understand God. So we should boast not in our wisdom, might, or riches, but boast that we know God. And that's a heart thing, that's being born again. But we should also understand God. And this is where the mind comes in. We have to be thinking about his word. We have to think about who we are, what our role in the world is, why we're here. And that's important. And economics is a huge area of activity that everybody's involved in, whether they like it or not. So let's take a look at some of these ideas. But what do we mean when we want to understand God is, well, what's his will? What are his ways in government? What are God's ways in society? What are his principles from the word that we can learn about marriage, business, government, law? What are God's priorities? We do need to think about this. You know, what's more important, saving babies or whales? So whales are nice, but saving babies from abortion is probably a bigger priority to God. So in a fallen world, we have to prioritize. We have to think, well, what does God prefer? What are his goals? And God has goals. We're going to see that. So we need to keep that in mind. We do need to cover this big topic. Economics falls within this huge paradigm. And Tom mentioned that from Genesis 1:26, man is called to develop the earth. And development is God's idea. And development is to have authority, dominion, and leadership. So right away, the Bible separates us from Hinduism. We don't pray to the earth. We don't pray to the cow. We are higher than the cow or whale or bird. Humans are made in his image. Birds aren't. So right away, the Bible separates other worldviews, like atheism, which says we're an animal. We're just an advanced monkey. The Bible does not make that statement. That's why I'm so against evolution. The Bible does not teach an evolution, that man came out of the animals. He is a special creature made in the image of God. So here we see God gave us dominion. And as man goes out and builds the earth, and remember, God gave us a planet full of resources, full of uranium, full of the principles by which we can use this computer, build a computer, electrical signals, minerals, physics principles, chemistry laws. All those were built into creation. They're not accidental. So the fact that today we can fly a plane is not a miracle of man. It was always possible because God put all the metal elements there, the periodic table of the elements. Everything's built into creation for man to develop the earth. The question is it being developed in his way, in God's ways? And that's what we're going to see. But all kinds of activity, cultivating, produces culture. Culture is not just clothing and food and music. Culture involves other things like government. We're going to see that. And of course, ideas guide development. And Tom's been talking about Marxism, and the people in Cuba might be happy, but they'd be a lot happier if they're free. People adjust to slave societies because they know how to get by, and they can focus at least on one thing: relationships, even if they have no economic capacity. So a worldview guides the kind of thing you build, and we need to remember this. The biblical worldview is vastly different than the Marxist communist worldview. And we can look at some of their development. Pick any communist country you want in the world. Pick anyone. They're nowhere near the development of rights and freedoms and opportunities and even economics than the Western world. And don't say, you know, look at China, they really developed. China developed because the Western world foolishly moved all of its manufacturing over to that country and started building their running shoes and their tools and their clothing. And Walmart is practically 99% Chinese products. So China didn't develop because it has wonderful resources. It has taken from the West, and we've foolishly given them all our money, and now we're paying some of the price. So let's look this further. What are some of the products of development? Well, we see institutions and areas of influence in our society. We need to see this because economics is not isolated from politics. It's not isolated from law. It's not isolated from society or families who buy and sell and produce things. So we got to see all this thing working together. That's why in our seminar, economics is near the last topic, because so much of what influences economics has to come before. Who are we? What is a government? What laws should we have? What is a family? All these things need to be laid down in a fashion before you can understand what are we doing here? What is development? But here are areas, some call them the spheres, government, law, education, media, economics, the family, the arts. They're all areas that humans have developed, and some of them have been developed not after a biblical view, and we can see the influence of that. But these are parts of a society. And then we can see civilizations and nations that have been built, developed over centuries. Take the Roman Empire, take the Greek Empire, take the Soviet Union. I mean, nations are built using ideas called worldviews. And we can look at them. So the Bible gives us, the first one was Babel. And God went down in Genesis 11 to look at their development. And Babel, the people of Babel decided that they were going to be God. They were going to mount up to heaven and build a name for themselves. And basically you got your first secular humanist. Your basic human who says, we don't need God. We're going to make our name for ourselves. And we see lots of humans down through history who have taken on this role that they feel they're God. You got Caesar, you got Nebuchadnezzar, you got Pol Pot, Stalin, Mao Zedong, Saddam Hussein, people who, Hitler, people who believe that they're the top of the chain, and these civilizations become evil if they move away from a biblical pattern of development. You've got the Islamic world. 57 countries form the Organization of Islamic Council, and they have developed their areas of the world in largely an Islamic way, although they would all argue, oh no, we're not really following the Quran perfectly, and so it's not looking good. But in reality, in 57 Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries, you do not have one civilization that is superior to the Western world. Not one. Not in terms of law, freedom, rights. You know, they all have terrorists within them, jihadis, various groups fighting for political control. So Islam has not produced what the Judeo-Christian West has produced. And that's because they have a worldview that worships a God called Allah, and they believe in themselves as not fallen, so they don't deal with radical sin. And there's lots of philosophical and theological reasons why, but Islam cannot produce the Western world. That is why Muslims flee by the millions to get into Western countries in Europe and Canada and North America. They want to get out of the Islamic world. Why do they want to get out? They're like Cubans who want to flee Cuba. Why do they want to flee Cuba? Well, because they can't be free to do what they need to do, and their heart longs to be free. Why can't Islam produce freedom? Well, because it starts with a wrong view of man and a wrong view of government, because it has a wrong view of God. Okay, so we have North Korea, have the Marxist world. These are civilizations and nations built around a Marxist model. And we have the Western world. So basically, there are kind of four paradigm developments, models. There's the humanist, the secular humanist view of how to build a nation. There's a Marxist view of how to build a nation. We see communist countries, communist-led countries. like China, Russia, Cuba, North Korea. We also see Islamic paradigm of development. Now, that's because these countries use worldviews as their guiding blueprint for social development. And that's why what they produce will be vastly different in comparison to a biblical development paradigm. That's just going to show you that a worldview matters. The ideas you use to build your economy matter. They have to be true. They have to be just. They have to be right. And where do you get your reference point? Not from Karl Marx, not from Muhammad's book, although Muslims claim they have the perfect model, but they can't demonstrate that model. And of course, the Western world was developed largely by the Judeo-Christian worldview. So these are some of the competing models on Earth today. They're clashing. And some of it's very obvious through this COVID-19 thing, where China and its model of economic development and its communist-led, partly deceiving methods have really hindered the world and destroyed a lot of the economy and companies in the West. I just want to bring this up because one worldview, Marxism, uses this idea that they know the perfect way to structure an economy. And this is probably why they've never built a good one. This is their stages of development are these. They believe that societies start as slave societies. And trust me, North Korea still is a slave society, so I can't believe that they think it's really developed. They believe that these slave societies evolve or develop economically and politically into feudal societies. And these feudal societies become capitalist societies, which they say that's where most of the West is now, but they want to move it all towards socialism, which is increasing government control. So we can see some of this in economics. We can see the move in some countries more and more towards socialism, which is government control of things like we have in Canada, the insurance business in BC Hydro. When the government starts running car insurance and electricity and the ferries transporting people, you'll get mismanagement because they have an unlimited amount of taxpayer money and they're not accountable to the public. So we're going to talk about the foolishness of having government run businesses, and they will most likely not be profitable or be able to balance their books because government people making decisions over an airline are not facing reality of how to cut costs, and because it's not costing them anything if they fail. They can always dip into the taxpayer money. So this is the Marxist view of economics, that we need to become socialist. And then, of course, everybody needs to move to communism, which they say is the highest stage, the most perfect stage. But I challenge you to show me any communist country, communist-led country. I say communist-led because not all the people in China are communists. They can't change that because they're under the Marxist communist regime. And so these regimes control the economy of China. And they control all the businesses. The Communist Party runs the businesses of China. So when you bring a Chinese company here and they buy the oil fields in Alberta, it's run by the communist government, and they can dictate the kind of things you do. China has banned all canola oil for a time, shipments, out of trying to punish Canada because we are bringing charges against Huawei, you know, the lady who runs the company Huawei 5G network. So, you know, China uses economic threat, economic weaponry to try to damage other countries so they can get their way in the world. That's communism. That's Marxism. So these stages are important to see for the communist countries because they believe that economically they're superior. But it's absolutely clear that Cuba or North Korea are not superior to anyone in terms of economics output or freedoms. All right, so we got to understand God's goals in history as a Christian. We have to remember that even in economics, God wants to bless nations. Okay, the Bible says he wants to bless us, and he promised Abraham in Genesis 12, 1-3, that through Abraham, he would be a blessing, and all peoples of the earth would see the blessing of God. So one of those ways nations can be blessed is to follow some of the biblical models of Western countries that used Judeo-Christian principles. And some of that can be seen in economics. So some of these countries in Africa that are economically ruined by dictators like Mugabe in Zimbabwe, you know, they haven't followed a biblical model. They're corrupt tyrants just taking millions of dollars for themselves. You know, you had the same thing in Libya with Gaddafi, Colonel Gaddafi. All these guys, these dictators, did not seek to bless their countries, but rather to take the productivity and store it overseas in Switzerland bank accounts. So the Bible's view of economics is that Christians should seek to be a blessing. And economics is one area in which Christian companies have done that. They've taken their company and taken it to a poor nation in Africa and taught them how to build wells or farm goats or develop themselves. And this is part of the mandate God gave Christians. The other aspect that's very interesting is the command, or the principle, I should say, that involves a command. If we will humble ourselves and pray and seek his face, God will bring healing to the nations. And healing and blessing are totally unique to Christianity. There's no command in Islam to do this. In fact, in Islam, it's conquer. And Islam seeks to conquer nations and not bless them in the same way that the Bible says. Islam cannot heal a nation because it's a top-down form of government using the state to force religious behavior. So Islam can never produce a nation of free, open peoples. And you can look at this, whether it's Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, any of those countries that have Sharia-led governments, Islamic governments, become dictators in order to force theological obedience upon the people. So it becomes horrible. But the Bible commands us to bring healing to nation and to bring his blessing. So how do we do that? How do we do that economically? Well, we have to implement kingdom ways. So I'm going to use that term. I think we should use it. What are kingdom ways in economics? And we're going to get to some general principles later in our talk, but this is just trying to lay a general foundation. So the Bible talks about kingdom, and Matthew 28 explains it clearly when Jesus said that we should teach them to go into all the world and preach the gospel, and all power in heaven and earth are his, all authority, to go make disciples of nations, which means teaching them all that he said, teaching them kingdom ways. We see in Matthew 6:9, Jesus taught us to pray. He said, look, pray that the kingdom would come, which is God's will done on earth. So I'm going to tell you right now, Jesus wasn't talking about the second coming where he's going to come back. He wasn't saying, pray that I will come back. Pray that this kingdom comes down. He said this, the kingdom of God is seen on earth when you do his will. So when you love your wife and treat your family in a kingdom way, people see that in a nation of secular humanism and divorce and adultery, and they go, hey, what kind of way, you love your wife, you've been married to one wife, you've got wonderful kids, what is that? And we tell them, that's a kingdom way. And Tom gave an example of that, of honesty among the Mennonites who went to Belize. He said, they could have sold their timber that had knots in it for a fixed price, but if it had a defect, they gave people a discount. Well, that's a kingdom way. Don't sell people products that are deficient. Be honest. So we need to think about this in terms of economics. What are some kingdom ways? How do we build the world? How do we contribute to economic activity that's biblical? And how does that result in discipling nations? Discipling nations means show them the model, show them a kingdom model. And Jesus said, pray that the kingdom would come, which is his will done on earth in his way. So if we economically model certain principles, and Tom's talked about that, freedom freedom to invest and buy and sell, justice in the market, not fraud, not ripping off people, not deficient products. If we do those things and show them, then it's attractive to countries like Africa when they want to have an economy that works. You may as well forget following Karl Marx, forget following Islam. Most people are looking at the Western world for economic principles. And guess what? The Western world is built upon a Judeo-Christian worldview. So we ought to be able to demonstrate what that is. Now, here's the problem. A lot of Christians don't develop a biblical view of most things. They simply have some theological truths about how to get to heaven, but they never develop any principles about economics. And Tom's shared a few of them, and I heartily agree, and I'll share some more. And why is that? Why don't Christians start thinking of economic development? Well, a lot of it has to do with theological problems in their head. Number one, they think money's evil. They think this world is passing away, so we don't have to do anything. And they're so focused on saving people's souls that they forget we're supposed to demonstrate God's ways to the nations. Just what this verse says. Teach them his ways. Well, if you don't know his ways, then you're not going to be able to teach. I give an illustration. I don't know how to fly a plane. I haven't learned those ways. I can't teach anybody how to fly a plane because I don't know how to do it myself. So if we don't learn his ways in economics, we're not going to be able to teach anybody. It's no use going to North Korea if they suddenly said, you know what, we want to get rid of the Communist Party. We want to open up. We want to have an open society. Who can come and teach us economics? If we have nothing in our head, we're not going to be able to teach them anything. And so we need to think about this. We need to develop ourselves. Here are some kingdom ways, just to refresh our sessions so far. We've covered 8 other sessions. We got one more, but we've covered things like this. We want justice in the marketplace, not injustice. Just think about that. What does justice in the market look like? It means not ripping off people. It means not having the Chinese Communist Party invest in business and control and demand political concessions if you don't cooperate. You know, they're just punishing Australia's wheat exports recently, and also, I believe, some of the beef production going to China. China's decided to punish Australia because Australia questioned the role of China in this COVID disaster. And suddenly China's using its economic clout because Australia's invested a lot of time in marketing beef to China. So suddenly China wants to smack them. China wants to smack Canada with our canola exports. And so we have to realize that, yes, we can develop an economic model, but it also has to be connected to politics and law, not just business. In other words, we should not just be investing all our money in China. I believe it's right to stop investing in China because you're simply sending all your money over there, and they're a nation that's not politically just. The Communist Party has goals to take over the world, and they're using our money to punish us. So start investing in local businesses, start employing local people, stop sending your factories over there. And the president of the United States a year ago said he wants to bring businesses back to America. Quit putting your factories over there and building everything. So a lot of companies have brought their factories back. Now the product might be a little bit more expensive. Let me just say this. You know, here in my town, if I have the choice of going to buy a Chinese product or a locally made one or a Canadian product, if I can find one anymore, I will really try to support the local companies. Not simply buy everything imported from China on Amazon. So we have to be careful that we do support people who live around you, because when these cities run out of businesses and there's no more hairdressers and no more restaurants and no more little stores and everybody has to buy off Amazon, you might regret that we have all succumbed to shipping our money to China, and all the local little businesses have died. So we need justice. Back to this one. We need justice in the market. We need righteousness in government. not lawlessness and crime and corruption. And there's a lot of that in economics, and we have to think, what does righteousness mean in economics? We want freedom. The Bible talks about freedom, not tyranny. We don't want to have a monopoly. Do you want to have a Walmart in every major town, right next to every major university, like near Tom's? No, I don't. And in downtown Vancouver, they banned Walmart from downtown Vancouver because it would have killed all the local little florists, all the local little clothing stores, the little boutiques. So they said, no, we don't want Walmart downtown Vancouver. And I agree with that. So we need to be careful to think of freedom for others to make a living as well. We want health, not sickness. This is a kingdom way. That's why Christians go out and set up hospitals all over the world. Missionaries always go in and build a hospital and a school so they can help people get out of poverty. That's a blessing. Teaching kids to read and write, help them get out of poverty, and maybe, look after some animals and have a few cows. You're helping them. You're helping them stay healthy. We take medicines over there. The Western world gives billions and billions of dollars in aid to African countries every year. And a lot of it's stolen through corruption in the governments over there. A lot of it goes to these little self-interested tyrants who don't filter it down. And people are not healthy because they can't afford to go to the hospital. If you want to go to the hospital years ago, I don't know about now, but in the Philippines, you had to bring your own medicine because it wasn't provided. So imagine having to go to the hospital in the Philippines to have a major operation. Can you afford to pay for the medicine? I don't know. So health is a biblical value. We should help people. And of course, in the history of missions, Christians have done a lot to do hospitals. Even Mother Teresa went out and helped the sick people in India and served the lepers and those who were dying on the streets. We want order, not anarchy. If you think of Venezuela, where there's anarchy in the streets and corruption in government and lawlessness in crime, guess what? The economy is ruined. So the economy is ruined because of political reasons. So people are starving. There's no businesses left in Venezuela, and inflation is destroyed. People are trying to get out of there. That's thanks to a communist leader. And a lot of South America, and even formerly Brazil, and we know we have some people from Brazil listening. When you have socialist Marxist leaders, you have corruption, you have lack of production, and now they have a new president who's doing a great job to try and free up the nation and turn it towards prosperity, getting away from the socialist Marxist model. And we want peace in nations, not conflict. But peace is not something you march in the street for. You have to enforce peace. If you want peace in your body, you have to take antibiotics if you have an infection. You can't get rid of an infection just by speaking to it, peace, peace. You have to kill infections. If you want peace in your city, you can't just, fire all the police and everybody's going to be happy. You have to get more police. You have to confront criminals in the street with arms to stop criminals and thieves and robbers, or you won't have peace. You can't have peace in the international arena without an army. You can't have peace in your own heart unless you confront evil in your own heart. That's why Jesus came and died on the cross. He confronted sin, but it wasn't something he just spoke to it. He had to pay a price. Peace for man required the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. So peace is not cheap. It's not easy, but you can have it if you confront evil. So those are some kingdom ways. Security, not terror. We want sufficiency, not poverty. This is another economic principle. The Bible doesn't promise you're going to be wealthy. Now, you might be, but you got to be careful not seeking to become just wealthy, because money can be a trap. God can help us become wealthy, but not necessarily. So we have to be careful. There's a lot of rich atheists. There's a lot of rich Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims. Money is not a sign of God's blessing. I just repeat, sufficiency is, but not, you cannot preach this theology that says, God wants you to be a billionaire. What about all those poor Christians over in Africa? What about the Christians getting their heads chopped off? What about the Christians in the first century? They weren't wealthy. So wealth is not a sign of God's blessing. You can be wealthy, but you got to be careful It depends on why you have the gifts to make yourself wealthy. And if you're using it for yourself, then I'm afraid it's going to be a very bad thing in the time of judgment. Okay, another biblical principle is productivity. We should be productive. God gave us talents, use them. The Bible speaks very clearly not to waste your talent, not to bury it. So it's not right to sit here on earth just to make it through to heaven, just passing through. No, that's a false theology. I'm not just passing through. I'm here to impact the nations. I'm here to disciple nations. I'm not just sitting here cruising through this planet. We have to show them God's ways. It's called discipling nations. We're commanded to disciple nations, not just pass through. So productivity is a big feature of the Western world's economy. We're productive, not inefficient like the socialist systems in North Korea or Cuba. Truth is also an important part of economics. I mean, you can't have businesses if they're not speaking the truth or telling you the truth. Imagine going into a restaurant, you want to order fish and chips, and they serve you a plate full of snails. And you go, well, wait a minute, I ordered fish and chips. Oh, well, what's true for you is true for you. What's true for me is true for me. Imagine if they had relativity and deception on the menu instead of truth. Well, or if you went to buy a car and it was all rusted and broken down and the dealer said, well, that's the way it is. You go, well, I need the truth. You said it was in perfect condition. You can't have deception in the economic area because then the whole thing will collapse. We need progress economically, not failure. And look at all these nations on the planet that are economic failures. They're not progressing, and we're constantly throwing billions of dollars of aid to some of these countries, and it's not working because the corrupt elites at the top are taking the money, or they have systems set up that don't produce freedom for people to work, or there are no jobs because they're monopolies, or the government runs everything, and there's no way for people to use their talents to create free businesses. We want accountability too, not corruption. So easy to see corruption in economics, where millions and millions of dollars are taken off by corrupt leaders for their own benefits. Exposing corruption is really important. And one of the good principles of the Western world is we have a lot of inquiries. We have a lot of government investigations into corruption, whether it's corruption in the police or corruption in the businesses or even government offices. The Western world has built mechanisms into its political and economic system so that corruption can be identified and rooted out. And you don't see that in a lot of other countries. And that's why their economies don't work. They're not accountable. They're only accountable to themselves. And so corruption, they know how to pay off the judge. There's some countries where, if you're accused of a crime or whatever, you can pay off the judge. It's corruption. Or the government runs the court and the court just does exactly what the president wants them to do. Well, that's true of China. There's corruption in that Chinese court. And the Communist Party run the government and the Communist Party run the court. So don't tell me that communism works. So Marxism is one of the worst worldviews ever to hit the planet. That and Islam are both the two sources of political instability on the planet today. The Communist Party and the Islamic jihadists and nations that fund jihad and terrorism in the Middle East, like Afghanistan, Iran, and others. They're the source of the world's problems, the majority, not the Western world. And democracy is certainly more biblical than totalitarianism. You can't have a dictator running things. Democracy at least allows people the chance to become a leader. It allows Christians the opportunity to vote for good leaders or become one themselves. So democracy is not a great solution if you have only wicked people voting, because they will vote in wicked people. Democracy will only work when Christians are in authority, and that's what it says in the Bible. In Proverbs 29:2, when the righteous are in authority, the nation will be blessed. When the wicked rule, the nation will suffer. So democracy will not work if the wicked are getting into power all the time. And if the churches and Christians simply sit back and do nothing, then the wicked will become the government, and your democracy will be favoring all these little minor interest groups that want their way, and you will not have freedom anymore. So we must be part of the democratic process as Christians to vote. And if you don't have good candidates, run yourself. And if you don't want to run, find another good candidate and support them. Because if you give up democracy, you will be ruled by tyrants. And we're going to notice something coming out of this COVID-19 pandemic. Many of these governments, including the government of Canada, have moved towards taking more power to themselves, to punish people who don't, who get in a group of 5 or more, to punish people who are walking on a beach, to give you a big fine if you're sitting in a park with 4 people. I mean, this is terrible power. Now let's hope and pray that all these powers are returned to the people after this pandemic goes away. But I tell you, I seriously doubt it. There's going to be some tyrannical demands to conform to government demands that we never had before this thing. So these are some biblical things. We need to remember God has a plan in history. All things can be touched. I use the word redeemed, renewed by his ways, laws, and principles. Matthew 6:9, thy kingdom come, his will should be done on earth. So we need to learn his will for economics. And Tom's covered many of those principles. I'll cover a few more. So we need to realize this. Our job on earth here is not to, just cruise on through, just to ignore the earth, just to pretend, I'm not part of planet Earth. No, God expects us to be active in showing his will, demonstrating his will, politically, economically, socially, so that people can see his ways. And I remember witnessing in Australia back when we lived there in the 90s, and I had an Asian student move in next door to where we were living. And he asked me one day, there's something different about your family. I don't know what it is, but we don't have this in China. And I said, well, I'm sorry, maybe my kids are being a bit loud today if they're making noise. He said, no, there's something different about them. And I realized what he was saying. The way my wife and I related to each other and our kids was something he didn't see in China. And I said, oh, that's a kingdom way, I said. So this Chinese student looked at me and he said, what's a kingdom way? And I said, well, the kingdom ways we learned from the Bible. And he said, the Bible, what is that? And I said, well, that's a book that lists God's ways. They're called kingdom ways. He said, who is this God? And we told him about Yahweh and about Jesus Christ and his ways, that we should love our wives, we should love our kids, we should submit one to another, etc. And he wanted to give his heart to Jesus right then and there, and he did. And he became a Christian. He said, I'm going to go to China and teach these ways. And he started studying the Bible. So some other Chinese students noticed that Australia was super clean and organized, and you could drive down the streets. And this one Chinese student said to me, how did you get all this? How come it's ordered? How come it's clean? Can I buy a bicycle and ride anywhere I want? Can I buy a car and drive it anywhere I want without police roadblock? I said, yes. And he said, how did you get this? How did this happen? I said, oh, well, what I want to ask you is, where does freedom come from? Because he was noticing we were free when we were in Australia. People were driving around freely. I said, where does freedom come from? He said, I don't know. I asked him, does it come from the government? And he thought for a minute. He said, no, freedom doesn't come from the government. We have a government in China. We're not free. I said, yes, you're right. You're under the communist government. And they took away your freedom. I said, in Australia, the government may not take away our freedom because in the Constitution it says we are all under God. And I said, our government in Australia and Canada is not allowed to take away our freedom because freedom comes from God. But your government's taken it away because they're not acknowledging God. And that Chinese student gave his heart to the Lord on the basis of, where does freedom come from? And freedom is a kingdom way. God wants us to be free. Why? So we can serve him with our talents and gifts. So that's why you need freedom in economics. So all of us can be an artist or a painter or a mechanic or a politician or whatever you want. Freedom is important in economics so that Christians can demonstrate the talents God gave them and bring honor to him, because work is worship, as Tom Metallo told us. Work is a way in which you worship God by demonstrating that you have talents that you didn't get in any other way that except God created you in the womb, and you have certain talents and disposition, and you become a very famous musician or something. It's all the glory to God for the talents he put in your life. So we see in economics these principles manifested. We need freedom, we need accountability, we need all these things, and this is what the Bible communicates. And that's why Western world's economies have developed so quickly and are so better than the communist world, is because we've used the Bible and God's ways to build our civilization. Now, doesn't mean it's working that way now, so be careful, because I do not support everything that goes on in the Canadian economic policy area put out by the government, because they don't apply biblical principles in many areas. And so we have to be careful to think that Canada is a biblical country. No, it's not. There is no 100% biblical country except heaven. And this ain't it, because we have sinners in here. We have secular humanists trying to build it their way and have the porn industry. We got Muslims trying to change our economic to bring in Sharia law. We have to slaughter our cows in Alberta in a Muslim way so that Muslims can buy it. And that restricts our economic activity, because Saudi Arabia won't buy your beef unless Muslims are the ones who slaughter cows in Brooks, Alberta. So we're being constrained economically by Islamic principles called Sharia, and we should reject those in any economic development in Canada. Okay, so here we see that there's no part of life or society or nation that should not be touched by God's principles or his redemptive plan and rule. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Psalm 24:1. I repeat, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. God expects us to be his ambassadors here in every part of life. It doesn't matter what you're called to do, whether it's in retail or law or politics. You're an ambassador to demonstrate God's redemptive plan on earth, because we are commanded to make disciples of nations. We are commanded to make disciples of nations. And this is not the devil's world. He has influenced it by appearing as an angel to at least two worldviews. Two worldviews on this planet have begun when humans heard from angels. One was Karl Marx, who called the angel who visited him the Prince of Darkness. Another one was Muhammad, an angel who visited him, he called the angel Gabriel. And in both cases, these people produced books, one the Quran, and the other the Communist Manifesto, which have led to the slaughter of Christians all over the world. So we have to be careful that we think the earth is run by the devil. The devil can influence a human, and that human can write a book, and then millions of people die under communist governments, because humans believe the lies of Karl Marx, or that the angel who supposedly visited Muhammad was from heaven. It might have been from somewhere else, given the fruit of the slaughter of Christians. Islam is the biggest persecutor now of Christians on earth, being killed all over the earth by Islamic groups, governments, and jihadis. So we cannot say that the God of Islam is the same God as the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible is loving. Why would if the God of the Bible was the same as the God of the Quran, why did the God of the Quran suddenly turn on Christian people and slaughter them? So no, they're not the same God at all. And I'll say that forcefully and truthfully. And there's lots more I can say on the topic, but we can't today. All right, so God's plan involves remaking things, and this is economically important. We can fix things. Christian countries fix things if it's broken. I've been to countries where everything just is broken and run down. Streets are broken, cars are broken on the side of the road. And I said to these people, why don't you fix things? Why is everything rusty and broken? Oh, we don't have any money. And, it's more important to sing and go fishing, I mean, it's like these countries without a biblical view are not trying to glorify God. They're just trying to survive. So part of God's plan is that we fix things. That's why he's fixing you and me. God is making us into a new creation. And he wants us to show that in what we fix. So Christians go into countries and fix their broken systems, their broken education system, their broken wells and water, clean it up, help them build businesses. We are fixer-uppers, economic fixer-uppers. We can fix not only hospitals, but nations. And that's what the world has been doing. The Western world's been spending a lot of money and years trying to fix Afghanistan. I got one big question. Why should we be trying to fix a Muslim nation? And just 2 or 3 days ago in Afghanistan, Muslims went into a maternity hospital run by Doctors Without Borders and killed 24 people, including newborn babies, in the name of Islam. So why should Western countries be trying to fix Afghanistan when you've got Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or any of these other Middle Eastern countries that have billions of dollars to spend on fancy high-rises? Why doesn't the Muslim world fix up the Muslim world? Think about it. Well, because they can't, because they don't have the principles to make it work. So here we in the Western world are trying to fix up Muslim nations that don't work, and Muslims won't do it. So therein is a clear illustration of who has the truth and who doesn't. We need to renew things that don't work, not just cars, but healthcare plans, companies. They can be renewed. We can reconcile things to kingdom ways. We need to get rid of Marxism and bring biblical education into the places like the former USSR. God's plan involves releasing nations from bondage. That's why we fought Germany. The Western world went over to Germany not to kill Germans. It was the Germans who were trying to take over the world. We freed the Dutch and the French and Europe and Africa from Hitler and Nazism. It was a bondage. They were committed to a demonic worldview called Nazism, killing 6 or 7 million Jews and everybody else they didn't like. And people fought that to release that nation from bondage. And that's why Germany has such a powerful economy today. You know why Germany's economy is powerful? Because America and the Western nations gave them a lot of help. And they're giving a lot of help to Japan. And that's why Japan's economy is so powerful. They didn't do it themselves. The Western world rebuilt Germany, rebuilt Japan, and gave them loans and went in there and set up businesses to help the civilization gets back on its feet. We need to reverse the effects of evil. Like, we need to promote family. That'll reverse the effects of this generation that's trying to have no marriage. In Canada, we have same-sex marriage now, or maybe 2 or 3 people who get married. Marriage means nothing. We can promote family and show that marriage between a man and a woman is the only model that'll economically work. We need to ban abortion. We need the proper punishing of crime, not letting criminals get off and victims suffer. So we need to work together with God. So being a Christian is really about being a partner with God. All right? God works through his people. 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal the land. I'm a partner with what God wants to do down here. I'm not leading. God is leading. He's demonstrating his ways to a fallen planet. He's already demonstrated it by dying on the cross. He's demonstrated it by sending the Holy Spirit to help us do his work. Why aren't we doing it? We have to partner with God's purposes in history, which is to disciple nations, to economically show them God's ways. We need to extend his kingdom principles. We need to help people apply redemption, to show them that they can change out of a Marxist model to a more biblical model, out of a communist economic structure to more free market. And this ensures that God's victory that he already won on the cross can be seen. What kind of victory? A victory over evil ideologies put out by Islam or Marxism or secular humanism. We need to show people that Christ is the Lord of all, not just the Lord of your heart, and that these worldviews that are not biblical, Islam, Marxism, secular humanism, are bad and dangerous and don't cause good economic development. and we need to demonstrate that God's ways are superior. And in doing so, we demonstrate when we change a collapsed system like a communist nation, and we bring biblical freedom in there economically, and it starts working, then it demonstrates the truth of what we're saying. And a clear illustration of this, I'm telling you, is China. China is not applying Marxist economic principles right now. It's allowing the free market to flourish. And that's because Westerners have gone over there and built all their businesses in China and give them all their manufacturing, which made China operate within partly a free market system, which is biblical. So basically, the communist government is utilizing a biblical principle, allowing some free market exchange to grow so they can get more powerful. But what are they doing with their money? They're now threatening the world. They're threatening to conquer Taiwan. They're building up their military. They're stealing technology from the US. They're threatening countries that don't comply. So they're not seeking to bless the world. Communism cannot bless the world. Never has, never will. And the same is really true for Islam. Those 57 majority countries do not seek to send aid to other countries like the West does. They do not seek to set nations free. They seek to bring them under the rule of Islam. And we must never allow Sharia law to be established or planted in Canada or any country, because it will only reduce the freedom and rights of women and other groups, and especially non-Muslims, as Muslims get special privileges to do their ways in your country. They soon corrupt your constitution as they want to bring Sharia law in and replace your constitution with Islamic principles. It's a form of economic invasion, political, legal invasion. So we are here to help to work with God. And here's a little acrostic of what a leader is. I'll throw it in as a sort of help us understand what we're overall doing. What is a leader? Well, L is learn to think biblically about every area of life. There was a time I didn't think about economics at all. Way back in the 80s, as a Christian leader in a ministry, I was sitting there one day and I was thinking about the economy, just like today we think about COVID-19 and what it's going to do to the economy, and it's going to destroy this and that. And I was sitting there thinking about that. And God said to me, Daryl, what would you do right now if you were treasurer of Australia? And I sat there and I tried to find a principle in my head, an economic principle that I knew, some biblical principle that I knew. And you know what? I couldn't find one. Not only did I not have a principle in my head that I could quote or think of, I did not even have the cupboard. I did not even have the little box called economics in my head where I had these principles stored. My brain only had theology and getting to heaven. We need to build little storehouse cupboards in our mind, in our thinking, for economics and law and politics and sociology and everything. We need to start putting real biblical principles in these little boxes in our head. So when somebody says to you, well, how should we build our economy? You'll actually have something to say. And you won't be spouting Karl Marx or a principle out of the Quran. So we need to develop ourselves to think biblically. That's what a leader does. E is examines philosophies and ideas. So we should be able to identify ideas in our culture and some of the philosophies like postmodernism or atheism that are pushing abortion or pushing euthanasia or pushing welfare, and be able to identify them. A is address and refute these philosophical fortresses that are capturing people. We can't have everybody on welfare. We can't give everybody free money and think it's free. It comes from the taxpayers. Our governments in the West are going to bankrupt our countries by simply giving people money nonstop. And you got to ask yourself, where's it coming from? So it's absolutely blind to think that you don't have to produce anything in the future. You can just look to government for handouts. Now, I realize these are difficult times and there's some good motivations in here, but we have to be very careful. You can go too far and you can destroy the value of your currency and other things. So be careful. D of leader is develop your gifts and talents. You know, a lot of Christians don't do this. They don't go learn. They don't go to take a course. They don't develop their singing. They don't do something. They're waiting for God to do something. And actually, he's waiting for you to do something. and that's develop yourself. There's a clear economic principle in the Bible where Jesus rebukes, through a parable, rebukes the person who buried their talent and only gave it back to the master. And that was the most wicked one. The one who developed and grew their talents 30 or 60, 90 fold were praised by the leaders. So we are not to simply sit on our gifts and talents. You have to develop yourself. And then you can use those talents and gifts to demonstrate God's ways on earth. E for leader is engage every area of society. So we have to realize you could be a lawyer, you could be a politician, you could be a pastor, you could be a plumber, you could be a printer, you could be whatever God tells you to be. And whatever you do in those areas is to show his principles. You can be a printer, and you're not going to print porn. If somebody wants to come to you and say, hey, I want you to print this magazine, you go, no, I can't do that. Fine. You have to have principles as a printer. You can be a lawyer. You don't have to bow to all the corrupt laws of your country. You can stand for righteousness and refuse as a lawyer to do evil laws if you know they're being used for corruption. Don't participate. The Bible's very clear. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness. Do not, but expose them. It's not easy to stand against the tide in today's world and expose evil. It's not easy. So E is engage every area. We want to reform society. We're not here simply to save souls. I had one person try to tell me, the most important thing is saving souls. I agree, we have to get people to heaven, but the most important thing is to obey God. If he wants all of us only to become evangelists, and we should quit our job as a lawyer or politician or businessman or teacher and all become evangelists, then how would society be developed to the point where we had finances and freedom to be able to go preach the gospel? So you can't separate discipling of nations from the saving of people's souls. The two are hand in hand, and you have to ask God how you manifest both of those. It's not either or. So that's part of our goals, and that's part of what we're doing. And I love this verse from 2 Corinthians 13:5. It says, examine yourself. Take a look at yourself. I had to do this with my lack of economics. I said, oh my gosh, I don't know anything. I had to examine myself and see if in the area of economics, I was even in the Christian faith. An illustration of this, I was teaching at a Christian university one time, and one of my students, I was teaching political science course, and we were talking about economics. And this one student says to me, oh, Jesus was a communist, wasn't he, professor? Wasn't Jesus a communist? Didn't he say that we should share everything with each other at this one verse here? Give everything you have to others and share. And I said, no, that's not communism. That's generosity. In other words, it's not a command to give everything away. Jesus didn't give all his clothes away or his food. So the people take the Bible and try to stick communism into the Bible and try to tell me that Jesus was a communist. That's an ultimate insult. Jesus promoted generosity in that particular verse. In other verses, he did not tell you to sell everything you have and give it to the poor. So we got to be careful not to try and turn Christianity into Marxism, as though, we're just, because Marxism makes everyone poor. Just look at Cuba, look at North Korea. Everyone becomes a slave of the state. Everyone becomes poor. It's equality, all right, the equality of poverty. So let's all examine ourselves. Let's think about what we think. Let's don't just, spout off these ideas. And I want to just drop a few ideas in for the next section. I'm going to do one more short talk. I want to have you think about the word capitalism, because is it actually biblical? And is the Bible supporting capitalism, or is it supporting the free market? And there's a big difference. And so we'll take a look at that. I'm going to stop the tape and we can have a couple of questions.